She thought she could steal my husband, so I made sure her own husband found out first. Isabella Turner stood quietly behind the counter of the small cafe where she worked, wiping down tables with a practiced calm that masked the whirlwind of her thoughts. The late afternoon sun filtered through the cracked window panes, casting long shadows across the cozy but worn interior. Outside, the streets of Cedar Creek hummed with the slow rhythm of a small town, where everyone knew each other's stories, or at least thought they did. Isabella was known here, but not truly seen. A single mother juggling two jobs to give her daughter a better life. She carried the weight of responsibility on tired shoulders, yet greeted every customer with a humble smile. She was the kind of woman who faded into the background, unnoticed and underestimated. Across town, at the grand estate that towered like a monument to power and privilege, Vivian Moore orchestrated her latest plan with the chilling precision of a predator. Married to Thomas Moore, Cedar Creek's wealthiest businessman, Vivian's beauty was sharp-edged and her veneer flawless. But beneath it lay a simmering insecurity fueled by envy. Isabella's quiet strength, the affection she inspired in the community, and perhaps most painfully, the gentle kindness of her husband David Turner, did not escape Vivian's notice. In her mind, Isabella's family happiness was a mirror, showing everything Vivian lacked. Instead of confronting her own loneliness, Vivian decided to tear down what she envied. The stage was set at the monthly community dinner, a gathering that brought everyone together beneath the aging rafters of the town hall. Laughter and chatter filled the room, but beneath that surface tension simmered Vivian's cold calculation. As the plates were cleared and the wine poured, she sowed seeds of humiliation with a casual flick of her tongue. Leaning in towards the circle where Isabella and David sat, she hugged the spotlight with a sharp smile and whispered cruel insinuations for all to hear. "Isn't it sad?" Vivian's voice cut through the hum of conversation. "How some women try so hard but still can't keep their husbands interested. I mean, poor Isabella. You'd think a hard-working mother would at least keep her man loyal." Her words dripped with disdain, the venom veiled as polite banter. Heads turned, eyes flickered with shocked curiosity, and a hush began to spread. Isabella's cheeks burned, her mouth suddenly dry. The warmth of the room seemed to compress around her like a shrinking cage. David's glance was tense, confusion crossing his gentle features. The murmurs grew louder as Vivian continued, each jab sharpened to slice at Isabella's dignity. Maybe David just needs a little more excitement, something he can't find at home. The subtle implication hung heavy in the air like a dark cloud. Isabella swallowed hard, the sting of betrayal unraveling everything she had quietly built. The neighbors she had greeted with smiles moments before now looked at her with suspicious eyes. In that piercing instant, the bustling community dinner fell into a cold silence, an invisible spotlight exposing Isabella's supposed failings. Her hands clenched the edge of the table as the world seemed to tilt. Not just humiliation, but an unjust judgment, flung like stones from those she once counted as neighbors. The laughter that followed Vivian's cruel quip was sharp and carrying the taste of triumph. While everyone else moved on, the weight of the moment settled deep within Isabella's chest. Yet beneath the crushing shame, a whispered defiance stirred. Isabella met Vivian's smirk with steady eyes, even as the world seemed to crumble around her. She was determined that this would not be the end. Something fierce flickered inside her, a promise that the truth was far from what Vivian wanted everyone to believe. The days following the community dinner stretched endless and cold for Isabella Turner. The sting of Vivian's public humiliation lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. When she walked down the streets of Cedar Creek, the once warm nods from neighbors became guarded whispers. Some glanced her way with pity, others with veiled judgment, and a few, she suspected, relished her fall. The weight of Vivian's words clung to her like a second skin. The insinuations had planted doubts that began to worm their way into the hearts of those Isabella had trusted. At home, the silence between Isabella and David was heavy with unspoken fears. David, ever kind and protective, tried to conceal the turmoil building in his eyes. But Isabella saw it all, the hesitation, the doubt flickering on the edge of his smiles. It was as if Vivian's poison had seeped through every friendly smile and casual glance. Isabella's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the heartbreak of feeling so thoroughly outcast. The gut-wrenching irony of being judged as incapable of keeping her family intact while fighting daily to hold it together was not lost on her. Vivian seemed to revel in her growing power. At the cafe, she appeared more often, dressed to intimidate, speaking just loudly enough for Isabella to hear. With every sly comment about loyalty, with every crowded glance meant to unsettle, Vivian made it clear she was winning. Sometimes, the most devoted husbands just need a little more fun. She whispered one afternoon to a group of onlookers, a sinister grin tracing her lips. The message was unmistakable. Vivian's cruel game was gaining momentum, and Isabella's support was shrinking like a fragile flame fighting the wind. The emotional toll weighed heavily on Isabella. Sleepless nights became a routine, and the quiet moments she once cherished with her daughter now felt laden with pressure to be strong. Tears often threatened to spill, hidden behind a brave exterior. Each time she faced Vivian in passing, the arrogance in her rival's eyes sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest. But beneath the hurt, something else simmered, an ember of indignation, a growing resolve not to let the bitterness define her story. One evening, after another day of barely concealed glances and whispered gossip, Isabella confided in her childhood friend, Jenna. They sat at the small kitchen table, where Isabella's hands trembled over a simple cup of tea. Jenna's eyes were fierce with concern, as Isabella recounted Vivian's betrayal. "You don't deserve this," Jenna said firmly, her voice low but resolute. "You're better than the rumors, better than her tricks. You need to fight this, not with anger, but with your head." The words were a gentle lifeline, reminding Isabella that she wasn't alone in the storm. As Isabella listened, hope flickered deep within her. She realized she couldn't keep shrinking into herself or pretend the whispers didn't hurt. But humiliation, if faced with courage, could become a catalyst, not the end of her story. Though the road ahead was hazy and fraught with obstacles, she made a quiet decision to reclaim her dignity and find a way to turn this darkness into light. She knew this wouldn't be easy, and the watchful eyes of Cedar Creek would not forget quickly. But instead of retreating, Isabella would quietly prepare to confront the injustice that threatened to unravel her life. If you've ever felt weighed down by unfair judgment or betrayal, remember, sometimes the strongest battles are fought not with fists, but with unwavering integrity and patience. Isabella's journey was just beginning, and so is the lesson her story holds for us all. Isabella's days soon became a delicate balancing act between hope and hardship. Each morning she rose earlier than before, steeling herself to face the lingering whispers and sideways glances that now accompanied even the simplest errands. At work, the modest cafe had become an uneasy stage where she welcomed guests with a practiced smile, though inside, the tremor of insecurity echoed louder. The whispers followed her there, some thinly disguised as casual chatter among customers, others unmistakably pointed. Yet each time she felt her resolve waver, she clung to the image of her daughter waiting at home, the bright spot of love and innocence that deserved all her courage. Isabella reached out to David more often, desperate to bridge the growing silence. But David's demeanor had shifted. Though his kindness endured, a veil of confusion and distance had settled like fog between them. She noticed the way his eyes darted away when their conversations brushed too close to the subject of Vivian's poison. She wanted to believe he still trusted her, as he once had, but doubt was a virus that spread silently. It gnawed at the foundation of their marriage, threatening to collapse all they had struggled to build. In moments of vulnerability, Isabella confided again in Jenna, who remained an unwavering source of support. Together, they brainstormed subtle ways to redirect the narrative back towards truth. Isabella attempted to engage more with the community, volunteering for local events, joining groups she previously avoided. Each smile she offered, each small kindness she extended was an attempt to remind Cedar Creek who she truly was. Yet no matter the effort, Vivian's shadow seemed to deepen. The arrogance in Vivienne's smirk grew more brazen when Isabella crossed paths with her. A constant reminder that the battle was still far from over. A quiet hope floated on the horizon when a chance conversation with Jenna revealed a surprising truth. Vivienne herself was not entirely innocent. Jenna, cautious but sincere, shared rumors she'd uncovered. Vivienne had been spending unexplained evenings away from home, seen in discreet company, far from prying eyes. It was whispered that Vivienne had formed a secret liaison with a local married man, one no one dared suspect, least of all Isabella herself. The revelation cracked open a door Isabella hadn't even realized was locked. A flicker of possibility grew into a spark. Perhaps Vivienne's venomous attacks were a calculated mask, a deflection to hide her own betrayal. The idea stirred something fierce within Isabella, not just vindication, but clarity. If Vivienne could stoop so low to ruin others, what other secrets might be lurking beneath the polished facade? Still, the path ahead was riddled with uncertainty. Isabella wrestled with the moral dilemma: how to uncover the truth without becoming what she despised. She was determined to rise above the bitterness, yet justice wouldn't come from surrendering her integrity. The pieces were there, if only she could find the courage to connect them. Through the fog of doubt and frustration, a delicate plan began to take shape. Isabella knew that exposing Vivienne's duplicity could dismantle the cruel narrative aimed at her own family, but she also knew it had to be done with care, respecting boundaries, guarding privacy, and above all, protecting those she loved. Hope was no longer a distant dream, it had taken form. Whispered through late-night talks with Jenna and the quiet confidence Isabella nurtured in stolen moments of reflection. The question was no longer whether she could reclaim her dignity, but how. And deep inside, her heart whispered a fierce truth. She would not let Vivienne's deceit define her any longer. If you've ever found yourself lost between hope and despair, remember this: sometimes strength is born not in moments of triumph, but in the patient crafting of a path through uncertainty. Isabella's quiet fight was far from over, but every step forward was a victory in itself. Weeks passed, and Isabella's world seemed to tremble on the edge of unraveling. The murmur of suspicion that Vivienne had fostered among the townspeople had seeped into even the most sacred corners of her life. At the cafe, a few regular customers stopped coming altogether, whispers trailing behind their retreating footsteps. Her once friendly neighbors now met her gaze with cold avoidance, their eyes averted as if she carried a contagious shame. Even David's quiet distance grew heavier, the warmth between them fading to a fragile thread, fraying with every passing day. The weight of isolation pressed on Isabella's shoulders like an unbearable burden. Then there was the dinner party, the annual gathering hosted by the Moore family, where the town's elite gathered to flaunt wealth and influence. Isabella had been invited, but when she stepped through the grand entrance, thick gazes and sharp glances pinned her like a bug under glass. Vivienne was there, radiant and smug, encircling herself with admirers as she basked in her reign. Before long, Vivienne's cruel game escalated to a new height. With a voice honeyed and cold, Vivienne raised a glass to draw attention. "Isn't it remarkable," she began, eyes glittering maliciously, "how some women claim devotion while their homes quietly crumble?" She let the silence stretch, forcing every forkful and murmur to stop. Then, with a smile like a dagger, she added, "Poor Isabella, struggling to hold on to love that's clearly slipping through her fingers. Maybe David finds his happiness elsewhere." The room erupted in shocked gasps and uncomfortable shifting, while Isabella's heart sank like a stone. Humiliated before the drunken crowd, Isabella felt herself shrink, the shame wrapping around her like chains. The laughter that followed was cruel, tearing the thin veil of dignity she'd fought so hard to keep. The sting was sharper because it came not just from Vivienne, but from those she had once called friends. Even David's expression was guarded, torn between disbelief and concern, as the seeds of doubt took root in his gaze. That night, alone in the dim light of her kitchen, Isabella sat with trembling hands, tears blurring her vision as she grappled with the sheer weight of betrayal. The innocence of her daughter's peaceful sleep felt miles away from the storm raging inside her. She questioned herself, her worth, and the future she was fighting to protect. The loneliness was suffocating, and for the first time, despair threatened to extinguish her flickering light. But amid that darkness, a spark of defiance ignited. Isabella recalled her promise to herself, the vow that truth would prevail and that she would not be beaten by slander or cruelty. She recognized Vivienne's actions for what they were: desperate attempts to mask her own guilt and insecurity. Guided by that clarity, Isabella renewed her determination to fight back, not with rancor, but with wisdom and patience. That very week, Jenna returned with startling news. Vivienne's secret was no longer just a rumor. Evidence had surfaced, discreetly passed along by concerned friends, that Vivienne had been involved in an affair of her own, with a man no one could have suspected, Thomas More, her own husband. The revelation was a brutal irony that cut through the town's whispers like lightning. Isabella's carefully held plan crystallized. The truth, once revealed to Thomas, could shatter Vivienne's web of lies and clear her own name. But there was a delicate line to walk. Exposing Vivienne without stooping to her level required restraint and cunning. Isabella wrestled with anxiety and fear. What if the truth tore apart more than just Vivienne's pride? What if it hurt innocent people? Yet, she understood that justice often demanded difficult choices. Her path forward was no longer a question of if, but when and how. The weight of humiliation was immense, but it had also forged a steel resolve. Isabella looked toward the horizon, knowing the storm ahead would be fierce, but determined that it would carry her closer to redemption. If you find yourself overwhelmed by humiliation or betrayal, remember that even in the darkest hours, courage and clarity can light the way. Isabella's story reminds us that hitting rock bottom is not the end. It's the first step toward rising stronger than ever before. After the devastating confrontation that left Sophie shattered and isolated, the silence of her small apartment felt suffocating. The echoes of whispered cruelty chased her through every room, each shadow a reminder of her public humiliation. Yet, as she stared out of the rain-speckled window into the gray morning, a faint, trembling ember of something unspoken began stirring deep within her. Her phone buzzed softly, interrupting the heavy quiet. It was a message from an old colleague. "I heard what happened. If you want to talk, I'm here." The simplicity of the words struck her harder than she expected. She hadn't realized how much she'd cut herself off from the connections that once balanced her world. Tentatively, a fragile hope flickered, a possibility that maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. Sophie's mind drifted back to the days before the incident, when her confidence was quietly strong, not arrogantly loud. She recalled her passion for art, the gentle way she lost herself in painting, the small victories that gave her life meaning beyond social judgments. Slowly, a plan began to brew. Perhaps reclaiming her identity outside the circles of cruelty might be her path forward. The next days were filled with small, tentative steps. Attempting to reconnect with friends she'd neglected, joining a local art workshop she had once admired from afar. Each interaction was awkward, weighted by memories of shame, but also tinged with surprise at moments of genuine kindness. Some welcomed her without hesitation. Others held back, cautious. Yet none judged her for long. One afternoon, during a quiet moment at the workshop, an older artist noticed the tremble in Sophie's brushstrokes. Without pressing, she simply shared a story of her own past failures and how art became her refuge from the harshness of the world. That simple empathy, the unspoken understanding, was a balm Sophie never knew she needed. Still, whispers from the past followed her. Messages from social media, eyes turning as she passed, the relentless replay of the humiliating event in her mind's eye. But each day, as she stepped into the sunlight, she carved out a sanctuary within herself, built on resilience and the faint but growing assurance that her story was not over. As these moments unfolded, Sophie began noticing subtle changes. A warmth returned to her smile. A quiet strength settled into her posture. The internal narrative shifted from shame towards possibility. Something was awakening, something that suggested she could someday stand tall, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever felt crushed under the weight of public scorn. In this fragile space between despair and hope, Sophie's journey was far from over. Yet, the path ahead was no longer invisible, and the walls of isolation slowly began to dissolve. For anyone watching her quiet battle, it became a reminder. Even in the darkest moments, a single spark, sometimes found in unexpected places, can begin to light the way forward. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by judgment or rejection, remember that healing often begins with the smallest acts of courage and connection. Sometimes, the people who offer their kindness might be closer than you think. Keep looking, keep reaching out. One chilly morning, Sophie arrived at the art studio feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. The room buzzed with quiet activity, brushstrokes, soft conversations, the scent of paint and turpentine mixing with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She took her usual spot by the window, her hands slightly trembling as she prepared her canvas. Today, though, there was an unspoken tension simmering beneath the surface. As the session progressed, the studio door creaked open. Sophie glanced up and froze in disbelief. Standing hesitantly in the doorway was Natalie, the very colleague whose scorn had orchestrated Sophie's public downfall. For a brief moment, the years of whispered insults and humiliation flashed through Sophie's mind like a storm. Her heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. To Sophie's surprise, Natalie's gaze was not filled with triumph or contempt, but with something fragile and uncertain. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Sophie. No sneer, no sarcastic comment. Instead, she offered a tentative nod and said, "I heard about the gallery, your work, it's incredible." The room grew still as Sophie processed the words. Rumors had already begun to spread that Sophie's paintings were gaining recognition beyond the workshop. Now, here was the very person who had once dismissed her out loud. Acknowledging her talent in front of others, Natalie's voice cracked slightly. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I let jealousy cloud my judgment. I thought bringing you down would lift me up, but it never worked that way. I'm sorry." A hush fell over the room. Eyes widened in surprise. Sophie's complex emotions wrestled within her. The raw wound of past humiliation still lingered, but beneath it, an unexpected warmth grew, without fully understanding why. She reached out and offered a small smile. "Thank you for saying that." Their exchange sent ripples through the studio. Whispers spread quickly. Some skeptics doubted the sincerity, while others admired the humility. But what mattered most was this. Natalie's apology was genuine, and for the first time in a long while, the tension that had shackled Sophie's spirit loosened. Even the antagonists, the peers who had fueled the fire of judgment, began to falter under the weight of a kindness they hadn't anticipated. The gallery exhibition opened weeks later, a culmination of Sophie's brave steps forward. Visitors marveled at her vivid canvases, each painting a reflection of pain, hope, and resilience. Among the attendees stood faces Sophie never imagined would support her. Old friends rekindled, curious strangers, and yes, even a few who had once dismissed her. As Sophie stood quietly in a corner, a reporter approached, eager to capture the story behind the art. She hesitated, then spoke with a calm clarity that surprised even herself. "This is not just my story. It's for anyone who's been made to feel small or invisible. Sometimes, humiliation can push us to the edge, but it can also be the catalyst for discovering who we truly are. Her words resonated far beyond the gallery walls. Throughout the day, as applause and admiration swirled around her, Sophie realized that true transformation often comes not just from triumph over adversity, but from moments of grace, even from those we least expect. As the evening wound down, a new chapter was quietly taking shape, not just for Sophie, but for everyone touched by her journey. If you've ever faced cruelty or doubt from those around you, remember this moment. Forgiveness and courage can break the strongest chains. Healing can come from unexpected places, and every act of kindness has the power to rewrite a story. Keep your heart open to both giving and receiving. It might just change everything. The days following the gallery opening were unlike anything Sophie had experienced before. The faint but steady murmur of appreciation for her art swelled into a chorus of genuine respect. Invitations arrived, exhibitions, interviews, even offers from galleries in other cities. But beyond the professional vindication lay something far more profound: Sophie's personal reclaiming of strength. One afternoon, she received an unexpected call from her former manager, the very person who had publicly disparaged her and dismissed her work. The voice on the other end was hesitant, perhaps even ashamed. "Sophie," he began, "I've been watching your progress. I have to admit, I misjudged you. Would you consider meeting? I think there's a conversation we need to have." The idea of confronting the ghosts of her past was daunting. Memories of belittlement and betrayal flooded her mind, but she recognized that true closure demanded more than silence or avoidance. It required standing in her truth with confidence. When they met, the atmosphere was tense yet professional. Her former manager offered a sincere apology, acknowledging his role in the painful chapter of her life. He explained the pressures and insecurities that had driven his behavior, not to excuse it, but to show accountability. Sophie listened, her heart opening to a blend of empathy and self-respect. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," he added. "You've turned hardship into something beautiful." Those words, simple yet profound, fueled Sophie's resolve. She realized the significance wasn't in external validation, but in her ability to forgive, not for anyone else's sake, but to free herself from the bind of past wounds. At the same time, pure joy surfaced in unexpected moments, the genuine smiles of newfound friends, the excited chatter of art enthusiasts who saw her not as a scandal, but as a creator with a story to tell. Sophie found herself standing taller, walking with an unshakable dignity that came from embracing her journey, scars and all. Word of her transformation triggered ripple effects among those who had once scorned her. Some tried to rekindle fractured relationships, others withdrew, unable or unwilling to change. Yet Sophie no longer needed to nurse wounds caused by rejection or judgment. Instead, she held fast to the clarity that kindness and integrity were not weaknesses, but formidable strengths. Her art became a mirror reflecting not only her pain, but her triumph over it. Each brushstroke symbolized perseverance. Every color choice told of hope reborn. Through her work, Sophie reached hearts that had once been closed to her, quietly inspiring others who felt silenced by criticism and shame. In one stirring moment during a new exhibit, as the gallery bustled with visitors moved by her story, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your paintings helped me find courage when I thought I was broken beyond repair," she whispered. Sophie's chest swelled with a deep, unspoken gratitude. This was the true victory, the chance to transform humiliation into a beacon of hope for others. Sophie's journey had come full circle. From the depths of despair to the heights of redemption, she claimed her narrative with grace and authenticity. The threads of her past now wove a tapestry of resilience, illuminating the path ahead with the brilliance of someone who refused to be defined by others' cruelty. If you've ever doubted your worth because of harsh judgments, remember that the power to rise lies within you. Strength is not born from perfection, but from embracing the full spectrum of your humanity. Keep believing in your light, and let your story be the one that inspires others to shine theirs. One chilly morning, Sophie arrived at the art studio, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. The room buzzed with quiet activity, brushstrokes, soft conversations, the scent of paint and turpentine, mixing with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She took her usual spot by the window, her hands slightly trembling as she prepared her canvas. Today, though, there was an unspoken tension simmering beneath the surface. As the session progressed, the studio door creaked open. Sophie glanced up and froze in disbelief. Standing hesitantly in the doorway was Natalie, the very colleague whose scorn had orchestrated Sophie's public downfall. For a brief moment, the years of whispered insults and humiliation flashed through Sophie's mind like a storm. Her heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. To Sophie's surprise, Natalie's gaze was not filled with triumph or contempt, but with something fragile and uncertain. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Sophie. No sneer, no sarcastic comment. Instead, she offered a tentative nod and said, "I heard about the gallery, your work. It's incredible." The room grew still as Sophie processed the words. Rumors had already begun to spread that Sophie's paintings were gaining recognition beyond the workshop. Now, here was the very person who had once dismissed her out loud. Acknowledging her talent in front of others, Natalie's voice cracked slightly. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I let jealousy cloud my judgment. I thought bringing you down would lift me up, but it never worked that way. I'm sorry." A hush fell over the room, eyes widened in surprise. Sophie's complex emotions wrestled within her. The raw wound of past humiliation still lingered, but beneath it, an unexpected warmth grew. Without fully understanding why, she reached out and offered a small smile. "Thank you for saying that." Their exchange sent ripples through the studio. Whispers spread quickly. Some skeptics doubted the sincerity, while others admired the humility. But what mattered most was this: Natalie's apology was genuine, and for the first time in a long while, the tension that had shackled Sophie's spirit loosened. Even the antagonists, the peers who had fueled the fire of judgment, began to falter under the weight of a kindness they hadn't anticipated. The gallery exhibition opened weeks later, a culmination of Sophie's brave steps forward. Visitors marveled at her vivid canvases, each painting a reflection of pain, hope, and resilience. Among the attendees stood faces Sophie never imagined would support her. Old friends rekindled, curious strangers, and yes, even a few who had once dismissed her. As Sophie stood quietly in a corner, a reporter approached, eager to capture the story behind the art. She hesitated, then spoke with a calm clarity that surprised even herself. "This is not just my story. It's for anyone who's been made to feel small or invisible. Sometimes, humiliation can push us to the edge, but it can also be the catalyst for discovering who we truly are." Her words resonated far beyond the gallery walls. Throughout the day, as applause and admiration swirled around her, Sophie realized that true transformation often comes not just from triumph over adversity, but from moments of grace, even from those we least expect. As the evening wound down, a new chapter was quietly taking shape, not just for Sophie, but for everyone touched by her journey. If you've ever faced cruelty or doubt from those around you, remember this moment. Forgiveness and courage can break the strongest chains. Healing can come from unexpected places, and every act of kindness has the power to rewrite a story. Keep your heart open to both giving and receiving. It might just change everything.